Van Churen.
Here.
Mr. Miller.
Present.
Mr. Janik.
Here.
Mr. Dembinski.
Here.
Mr. Wienarski.
Here.
Mr. Nahorn.
Present.
And the chair is present.
We have a letter on file.
We have a letter on file that Mr. Patak is not going to be able to be present tonight. Mr. Dembinski.
Move to excuse Mr. Pataki as a letter on file.
Mr. Wienarski.
Second.
All right, there's a motion and a second to excuse Mr. Patak from tonight's meeting. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries 7-0. Mr. Wienarski.
Standing rules of council require an auditor be present for finance committee meetings. I'd like to ask that we suspend council rules so we can proceed in his absence.
Mr. Dembinski.
Second.
Just for the record, that's rule number 40?
Number 44.
44.
There's a motion on the floor to waive council rule 44 requiring the auditor to be present for the finance committee meeting. Any comments or questions on this? Mr. Miller?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just briefly, who's going to speak on behalf of the auditor in regards to any financial questions we may have?
I think we're going to have...
Mr. Mayor?
I'll do my best. Okay. So we know anybody from auditors tomorrow.
Okay. Under, if those questions can't be answered, they can be referred, and then we can have them answered during full council.
Is he going to be excused for full council as well?
No, yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, all those in favor of excusing Mr. Patek, or I'm sorry, waiving council rule 44, excusing the finance committee, or the auditor from the finance committee meeting, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries 7-0. Two items on tonight's agenda. First item, A1822, an ordinance to add the bid and award of 2018 street program O1812 of an additional $250,000 from account 201-6001-52501 for miscellaneous street improvements and declaring an emergency. Mr. Mayor, would you like to speak on this?
I can speak on this. City Council has already passed the legislation which allows to bid and award the street program. They allowed for about a $1.1 million worth of street construction plus engineering. After reviewing the budget and looking at the general fund, I am able to squeeze $250,000 more out of the 201, which is actually general fund money, which is switched over to the street department out of the capital outlay. The bidding can happen as early as this week. We can advertise if this is passed. I'd just like to add another $250,000 to the street program, which with engineering puts this year's road program at about $1.5 million, one of the largest in a long time. But the money's there. There's $500,000 in that line item. We might buy a front end type loader, which would use some of that, but that $250,000 can definitely be spent, and we have it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
And this does need, again, with passing this on to council with the emergency and suspending rules later, allows us to take this to bid, start advertising it this week.
Thank you, Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Mayor, you might understand that if we add this $250,000 to the already approved budgeted street amount, you're going to be able to save engineering and putting out for bid costs by putting it together, or is this?
There might be some savings in engineering because some of this would go towards miscellaneous repairs or extending limits, which has already been engineered. I'd like to see these limits go in the apple orchard area, so we've got some roads that we only had enough dollars to go so far. So these extra dollars would be able to extend those limits all the way to an intersection or a little bit farther. It would allow the city to do some miscellaneous repairs in areas, and also North Main Street, the very far north part of town, is in real bad shape as you're leaving the city limits. I would like to add that. So it might save a little bit on engineering by doing it this way, but honestly, the main goal is to just add more dollars to construction.
Thank you.
And it might save engineering and bidding costs if we did this completely separate. I mean, this also adds it to this year's street program, rather than making it its own program on its own. So that could probably see some savings.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Anyone else? Mr. Wojnarowski.
Excuse me, I'll make the motion to send this to the floor of council as written.
Mr. Nahorn.
Second.
Okay. Any further comment or question? There's a motion on the floor to take A1822 to the floor of council with the emergency as written. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries 7-0. Next item, A1823, an ordinance to enter into a depository agreement with First National Bank and declaring an emergency.
Oh,
Mayor?
sorry. This is the depository agreement with, this has to do with our loan that City Council approved us to go out and get for the Lincoln Sipple on the Sidewalk program. We went out and looked at rates. This bank actually had the best rate of 2.35%, and we had the next lowest rate was 2.99%. So one of the stipulations that this bank gave us to get that low rate would be to hold the money in one of their accounts while we're spending that money. So it didn't seem like a whole lot. We talked with the treasurers. There's going to be some extra hoops to jump through, a little bit of extra work for everybody, but it seemed like a good idea. And they're also going to give us a small interest rate while our money's sitting there. So this just allows the treasurer, and he might have a little more to add, to enter into this depository agreement so they can keep our money while we're using it for those programs.
Thank you. Mr. Treasurer, would you like to add to that, please?
Sure. I believe, well, due to the fact that we're holding money and we have to put it in an account, we have to enter into a depository agreement with the bank. And in order for anyone in the administration to do that, council has to approve that. So that's why the vote is before you. This is just to facilitate your plan to read, in the mayor's plan to redo the sidewalks and so forth. I believe, though, it's supposed to be that the treasurer, under section 1, that not the mayor, the treasurer is hereby authorized to enter into a depository agreement. Because I believe I was the one that I'm the one that has to sign that.
Mr. Pecor, do we need to amend this before it goes?
I would think that's a good idea,
Yeah.
to amend this at this point before it goes.
So procedurally, it needs to be amended before action is taken on it. To change
yeah.
the phrasing, so that
Does
should
it
be.
get amended here or on council floor?
You can amend this
You
right
can
here.
amend it here, it's in
Okay.
there. This right here is section.
Mr. Miller?
Move to amend. So as to state that the treasurer will be listed.
Mr. Nahor?
Second.
Okay, so that's a motion to amend section 1 to replace mayor with treasurer in in the ordinance. Is that correct, Mr. Miller?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments or questions? Seeing none, this voice vote on the amendment to section 1. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries 7-0 as so amended. Mr. Dembinski.
Thank you. Is there any concern with, this is for the $3 million that we put aside for the streets and sidewalks. That was originally done through 2 separate ordinances. Is that okay having 2 different ordinances having one shared depositing account?
It seemed like it was okay with the bank when I talked to them.
Okay. I just,
All the auditing will be done with the auditor's office. They'll have 2 separate accounts that we're paying bills from.
okay, that works, thank you. With that, if there's no other things, I'd like to make a motion to take this to the floor of council as written, as amended.
Thank you, Mr. Dembinski. Mr. Miller,
Second, please.
further comments or questions, Ms. Treasurer?
Mr. Dembinski, I think the key difference is that is the fact that we're going to enter into the agreement. That's why council has to vote to authorize that to happen. I think, that's why you're probably not getting the details now, if you follow me. Or not?
No, not actually.
I was hoping that would.
My original question was, we did 2.5 million for streets and 500,000 for sidewalks. I didn't know if accounting-wise those had to be considered separate, or if we were allowed to put them into just one account here from the depositing perspective.
Oh, okay.
But if the accounting is all being handled by the auditor's office and everything's
Yes.
good, then I'm good. So, thank you.
Mr. Ranarski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, just real briefly here, the language of this reads the 2018 Road Reconstruction Program. Does that also include sidewalks? I understand the money's being used for part of the sidewalks.
And it says, and installation of sidewalks right below that. Very top paragraph.
Strike that from the record. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Further comments or questions? Seeing none, there's a motion to take A1823 to the floor of council as amended with the emergency. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries 7-0. That's all I have. Mr. Dembinski.
Move to adjourn.
Mr. Ranarski.
Second.
Motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. We stand adjourned at 6:55.
Nancy.
what I hear.
All right. Page 44.
No, really?
Okay, so you-
Oh, you're right.
you and-
Regular and special. Regular, special, and finance committee.
Oh, say it, finance committee?
Yeah.
So-
Don't be a Chuck,
Wait.
Ryan, you're smart.
Yes, sir.
Is this Kevin?
We'll call the April 23rd, 2018 regular meeting to order of the Amherst City Council at 7 o'clock. Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Dembinski?
Here.
Mr. Cowger?
Here.
Mr. Winarski?
Here.
Mr. Nehorn?
Present.
Mr. Miller?
Present.
Mr. Janik?
Here.
Mr. Van Turen?
Here.
We'll stand for the prayer led by Chaplain Nahorn and the pledge to the flag by Sergeant at Arms Dembinski.
Please join me in bowing your heads. Gracious God, the complex systems, beauty, and incredible details that comprise our earth are thought of especially this month as we acknowledge Earth Day. We share these lands with others, and ultimately how we use these resources reminds us of the important choices we all have of reuse and recycling in our own lives. And now let the words of our mouths and meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your vision. Amen.
I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We'll now go to item 4, the consent agenda. Oh, yes, we have a motion. Yes, Mr. Cowger.
I'd like to move to excuse Auditor Patak from tonight's meeting. He does have a letter on file.
Mr. Winarski.
I'll second.
There's a motion and a second to excuse Mr. Patak. He has a letter on file. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Motion is carried 7-0. Mr. Dembinski.
Move to suspend council rule number 44, which requires that the auditor or deputy auditor is present at a council meeting.
Mr. Cowger.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to suspend rule number 44, which requires the auditor or deputy auditor to be present at the meeting. Comments or questions? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Motion is carried 7-0, and Rule 44 is waived. We will go on to item number 4, the consent agenda.
Minutes of the regular council meeting held April 9th, 2018. Minutes of the Finance Committee meeting held April 23rd, 2018.
Mr. Cowger.
Make a motion to accept the consent agenda as read.
Mr. Winarski.
I'll second.
There's a motion and a second to accept the consent agenda as read. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Motion carries 7-0. The consent agenda is accepted as read. We come to item number 5, acknowledgements of the public pertaining to items on the agenda. Is there anyone tonight here wishing to speak on any of the items on the agenda? Mr. Uhas, would you please come to the front and state your name and your address?
Thank you. My name is Nick Uhas. My address is 884 Birch Lane.
Thank you.
May
You may proceed, yes.
I have a prepared statement that will take approximately 5 minutes. And
Will you also provide that statement at the end to
yes,
Mrs.
I certainly
Savinsky?
can,
Thank
along
you.
with attachments.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay. As I stated, my name is Nick Uhas. My wife and I have resided for the last 30-plus years since we decided to move to Amherst at 84 Birch Lane. I'm here tonight to speak about a community walkway associated with a small parcel of land that the city owns and is related to a piece of legislation you have been considering, namely A-18-21. I would have been here earlier in this process to speak to you, since I and others expressed our concern last fall about any decision regarding that walkway. But until this past Friday, when I assumed the city thought that this sale would just fly through council, and we saw a surveyor show up in our neighborhood, we had no idea that the city was going to take any action regarding this small parcel of land containing the community walkway. After reviewing the Building and Land Committee meeting minutes of April 2nd regarding the 10-foot wide by 116-foot parcel community walkway, and discovering inaccurate and potentially misleading statements, I felt the council should have additional information when considering this legislation, and that's why I'm here tonight. First, this parcel of land was always envisioned as a community walkway in perpetuity, not only a utility right-of-way and not land owned by adjacent lots. Here is a copy of the original survey for the development, which was presented to and approved by the Mayor of Amherst, Jack Kuntz, and the council on June 25th, 1957. It clearly spells out and indicates the small parcel of land as a walkway for residents. And I can pass that down. Second, this walkway has been utilized continuously by area residents for over 60 years, as envisioned by the developers, with no issues. Just think about that, 60 years, no issues. Yes, over time, the age demographics of that neighborhood have changed. Usage of the walkway has risen and then fallen. Just happens. But in the last 5 years, once again, the neighborhood is teeming with children and teenagers who use that walkway, in some cases, multiple times a day. And then there's the matter of safety. This walkway allows residents and their children to avoid the high traffic on Father Martel Drive, the privately owned drive to the St. Joseph Church, when they are on their way to school at Steele High School, Nord Middle School, Powers Grade School, St. Joseph School, and many athletic events that are held at those schools, and also Sunday church and church-related activities. Finally, in the Building and Lands Committee meeting minutes of April 2nd regarding A-18-21, the Secretary records that the Mayor stated that the neighbors, plural, are concerned about the kids using the private property as a walkway and trespassing and vandalizing their houses. That caused the neighbors, plural, to contact the city, unquote. That is inaccurate. I spoke to the Spellmans last evening, who own the adjacent lot south of that parcel, and I also have an email from Mrs. Spellman that she sent to our Ward 4 councilperson on August 21st of 2017, stating that the Spellmans contacted the city to just have the asphalt walkway repaired, not removed and not sold. That the administration took the easy way out, removed the asphalt, as opposed to repairing or replacing it, and then planted grass. I think we would not even be discussing this topic had it just ended there. It's grass right now. And I have pictures. Only one non-resident adjacent landowner who would benefit from the purchase of this walkway or parcel has raised concerns described in those meeting minutes. One. After the city removed the asphalt and planted grass, this one non-resident adjacent landowner posted no trespassing and keep out signs on city-owned property. How about that? It's obvious that if this parcel is sold to them, this will no longer be a community walkway as it has been for over 60 years. Consider this. If a resident adjacent to Maud Meeting Park complained about a plastic bottle thrown in their backyard from people using the park, would the administration propose selling that portion of the park to them as a solution? No, they wouldn't. That's absurd. And that would, so is this proposal. It's just an easy way out. In conclusion, this city has let down and disappointed this neighborhood's residents before. As when we had raw sewage in our basement years ago due to that administration, years ago, incompetence and negligence. This administration's proposed sale of this walkway parcel, I believe, is irresponsible, again, the easy way out, and once again purports to let down the neighborhood's residents. I urge you, as the council, not to let this happen. Please exercise your right, your independent right as a check and balance to the administration, and support the residents and taxpayers that elected you to council in voting no for the sale of this parcel. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Uhas. Could we have your statement?
Yes.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? Questions for Mr. Uhas? Mr. Miller?
Thank you, Madam President.
Mr.
Yes.
Uhas,
Yes.
would you like to state
Sure.
it right up? Yeah.
Thank you for coming up here. I wish I would have had this information in front of me much earlier. This is the first I heard of.
I wish I could have gotten to you earlier.
I was the first time I was made aware of any of this information. So I definitely want to see the validity of it. I saw the map. The map clearly states that it was a walkway. It was labeled that. It
Yes,
looks
sir.
like it's a city map to me. I passed it quickly so others could see it. I'd like to take probably another look at that
Sure.
as well. And being a big proponent of sidewalks and pedestrian-friendly routes in our city, that is a pet project of mine that I just keep pushing, and the mayor has absolutely been receptive to trying to incorporate when he can. In this situation, I'm not sure how we got to a point where we have a community walk that was not wanted to be removed by most of the community. It is city-owned, correct?
As far as I know, yes.
And we have a variance on it so that we can access.
I believe there are utilities under that
And
parcel.
the neighbors on both sides are not expected to clear that walk when it was a walk.
No.
So if I could just continue this so I can get clarity here.
Yes.
You went quickly, and I appreciate that because time is of the essence. But so I remember that walk. Like, I attend St. Joe's, I walked through there, and there's no other sidewalks, and that corner traffic spot is tough. That's a tough area. Actually, all of Terra and Birch, and you know as well, coming around living on the corner. So that's a tough traffic area, and I think you stated so eloquently that when ball games or church is going on, Father Martello Drive gets extremely congested, and there's no walkway. So you're in their yards anyway. And without sidewalks leading alongside that drive, or even on the outside of Birch heading into Terra, there's not as safe of a walk. So I see the concern there. So if I'm understanding this clearly, we had a form of asphalt walk there
Yes,
that was in need of repair,
correct.
and we chose to, instead of fixing the sidewalk, we chose to pull it up and make it grass so we don't have to surface that. That right there, if I were a sidewalk owner right now and I heard that, I would have a problem. Because this whole sidewalk program that we're attempting to do, that slaps in the face of it. Like, we need to be leading by example. So if that's a community walk, we should be continuing to upgrade our walks as well. And if it's a city-owned walk that is being utilized and is a safety, I don't know why we're taking away. I think we should be improving our safety walks for pedestrians. So the second piece I want to confirm is the fact that it isn't adjoining property owners that want this. It's one of the adjoining property owners to the current walk. Is that correct?
Yes. After speaking to the Spellmans, again, I have a letter stating Mrs. Spellman's original request for the city. It had nothing to do with the sale of that parcel to them, or part of that parcel to them. I will say, though, in fairness to the administration, that Mark Spellman did contact, and again, this is hearsay, but you could reach out to him. They could not make it tonight. That Mark Spellman did state that when it appeared to be a done deal and that parcel would be sold and no longer be owned by the city, he then said that he would be interested in purchasing half of that, as opposed to allowing the other adjacent property to purchase the entire parcel.
Let's expand your land away from your home to give you more privacy as well. Okay. So, all right, I think I've got all the information that I need from this end of it. I'm ready to yield the floor until it comes back to me, because I'd like to ask the mayor some stuff on, questions on this.
Okay, do
As
we
well.
have any other questions for Mr. Uhas? Okay, Mr. Janik.
I guess one question would be, how would you envision if we were to redo the sidewalk area? What composite would you like to use?
No.
What would be the perfect scenario, I guess?
I think we would settle for the grass owned by the city, but if it were to be redone, I don't think it matters whether it's asphalt or concrete. It just had gotten, it had lasted quite a long time, at least the 30 years we lived there. But eventually it heaved and gave way, and that's going to happen. And so, at some point it will always have to be repaired. I mean, like any other sidewalk. So I don't think it matters, Mr. Janik.
And currently, are there any students riding their bikes through there, or are they?
Yes, all the time.
Oh yeah,
all the time.
they do ride
The
bicycles through there.
cross-country team runs through there, all of some of the teams run through there. I was bringing my grandkids from Powers back to my house, and we just tromp through the grass there, and
Yeah. So, I mean, I haven't seen the condition of it lately, but I would imagine it's difficult to grow grass in that area when
Oh,
so many
it's
people
grown.
are.
No,
Oh,
it's
okay.
grown.
we'll stomp down.
No, it's grown.
But it would be more pedestrian friendly and bicycle friendly if it were
Yes.
paved.
And
Walkway.
one other thing, I just talked to the Spellmans on my way back from the park.
Mrs. Wright.
Oh, I'm not
Yeah,
allowed.
yes, you are, but you need to come up and state your name and that's okay. Well, go ahead, you can go ahead and,
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Yas.
I'm so used to just blurting out at meetings.
please state your name and address.
My name is Nancy Reichert, 886 Birch Lane. In coming back today this way, the Spellmans were sitting out, and I said, hey, how about coming to the meeting with me? No. But Mark did state that he's afraid that if the other party gets access to buy that land, that they'll be coming right up to his fence. And he's not real thrilled about that either. So it doesn't give him very much access there in that part. And it's another person that owns that home that I don't even think lives in Amherst. And it's being rented, so, that's all. Thank you. Oh, one other thing, 60 years. Kids have rode their bikes, they've fallen, they've scratched their knees, they've done this, they've done that. Not once did anybody sue the city. Not once.
Do we have any questions for Mrs. Reichert? Mr. Nahorn and then Mr.
Just
Winarski.
briefly, I was going to ask, so your main argument that it is very much used by
Very much,
students.
very much.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going back and forth to church, so are other people from North Woodhill. Even from Woodhill Drive, they'll come down and around and through that walkway area. And like I said, the teams are always running through there. Kids are walking back and forth to school. Sometimes late arrival, they're walking that way through the path. That is well used.
Is that all for Mrs. Reichert to Mr. Nahorn?
Yes, thank
Okay,
you.
Mr. Winarski, you have something for Mrs.
Mrs.
Reichert.
Reichert, I'm sorry, I know you want to sit down, but I do appreciate your input. I highly value your opinion. How long ago was it? Now, it was a asphalt walkway at one time, correct?
Right,
And
blacktop.
now, pictures I saw from the county auditor's website showed all grass. How long ago was that abated?
I don't know, this last summer, was it? Yes. Okay, last summer.
Okay, is that recent? And just off the top of my head, if you're going to have a public walkway, it should look like a public walkway, not like, my concern is that, okay, we keep it possession. I'd like to also see us make it look like a walkway again. That way it doesn't create the free-for-all where kids think that they can run willy-nilly through neighboring houses. It's a walkway, it's dedicated, that's the purpose, that's how it should be treated, not going over through other people's yards. So, I'll just leave it at that. Thank you for your input. Sincerely, it's important. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Van Truin, you have a
Very
question.
quickly, did one of you mention that someone put up no trespassing signs even though they knew it was city property? And was it the person who is not a resident?
Yes, but owns the property. They rent, that's a rental.
And they knew that this was city property, they put those signs up on?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Reichert. And thank you, Mr. Uhas. Anyone else wishing to speak on any item that pertains to the agenda tonight? Thank you. Seeing no other comments, let's go to item 6 on the agenda. Ordinances and resolutions, first reading. Item 6.
I'm sorry,
Yes.
could we get the mayor's thoughts on this?
Is it better to
During
talk
the
about it
item.
on
You
Yeah.
want to do it then? Okay, I didn't know if you wanted to wait and go back, or since it's fresh and in our head, but, okay, thank you, sorry.
Thank you.
Madam President, appreciate it.
Item on number 6, ordinances and resolutions, first reading. Item 6A.
An ordinance authorizing additional expenditures in the amount of $250,000 for the 2018 street the rehab program and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Winarski.
I'll make the motion to suspend council rules so this can be passed on the first reading.
Okay, Mr. Cowger.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to suspend council rule requiring 3 readings, so this can be passed on the first reading. Comments or questions? Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Madam President. So, whenever we suspend and we emergency and we fly this through, I need to make sure that everybody knows why I'm going to support this or not support this. And it sounds to me like this money is accounted for, and thus the auditor would say yes.
Yes.
This is money that's already been budgeted that will not impact adversely or put us in the red in any form because it's coming out of the general fund, and I know we're solid there. This is just to extend some of the street programs because other monies for capital improvements or what have you are not needed, and you believe this money can be moved over without adversely affecting any of the other departments?
Yes.
So if all those things are, you confirm and feel strongly that it doesn't put any of our departments in jeopardy, it doesn't put us in jeopardy, and that we have the funds to support this. I'm all about supporting getting our infrastructure up to where it needs to be. So I've supported you from day one on all these improvements of our infrastructure because it's much needed. So I have no problem with all those things being answered yes to vote for emergency and suspension rules. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. Any further comments or questions? Seeing none, roll call vote.
Mr. Dembinski?
Yes.
Mr. Cowger?
Yes.
Mr. Winarski?
Yes.
Mr. Nahorn?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Mr. Van Turen?
Yes.
Vote is 7-0. That rule is suspended. Mr. Cowger.
Move to adopt.
Mr. Dembinski.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to adopt. Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Dembinski?
Yes.
Mr. Cowger?
Yes.
Mr. Winarski?
Yes.
Mr. Nahorn?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Mr. Van Turen?
Yes.
Motion, vote is 7-0. Rule is adopted.
It'll be ordinance 01818.
Thank you very much. We'll go to item 6B.
An ordinance authorizing the city of Amherst to enter into a depository agreement with First National Bank for the deposit of loan proceeds and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Winarski.
I'll make the motion to suspend council rules so this can be passed on the first reading.
Mr. Cowger.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to suspend the rule that requires 3 readings so that this can be passed on the first reading. Mr. Dembinski.
Thank you, Madam President. Are we unable to access the money if we don't pass this and therefore are unable to pay bills out for the street program? Or
This is on a goodwill handshake. They've already closed the deal, the money's in our accounts, and this is on a goodwill handshake that will transfer the money back to their bank as soon as possible. So you might cause negotiations in the future to be not as good if we don't follow through with our word and do this as quickly as possible. It's a technicality. If you wait I don't think you're solving anything by waiting. You're getting we can access it to ask your question, we probably could, but I think we would jeopardize the relationship with this bank if we would do that.
Forward. Thank you.
Further comments, questions? Seeing none, roll call vote, please.
Mr. Dembinski?
Yes.
Mr. Cowger?
Yes.
Mr. Winarski?
Yes.
Mr. Nahorn?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Mr. Van Turen?
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. Mr. Cowger?
Move to adopt.
Mr. Winarski?
Yes, I'll second.
Motion and a second. There's a motion and a second to adopt. Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Dembinski?
Yes.
Mr. Cowger?
Yes.
Mr. Winarski?
Yes.
Mr. Nahorn?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Mr. Van Turen?
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0.
It will be ordinance 01819.
Thank you very much. Go on to item 7, ordinance and resolutions, the second reading. Item 7A.
An ordinance authorizing the City of Amherst Community Improvement Corporation to act as agent for the City of Amherst to enter into an agreement to sell a parcel of real estate owned by the city on Terror Lane, subject to the further approval of Amherst City Council.
Mr. Mayor, you wish to
Yeah, I
provide
can
additional
speak
comment?
briefly.
Sure.
That isn't a typical pathway or walkway within the city limit. This is a parcel of land that's very narrow and passes very closely between two houses. I would guess somewhere around 12 feet from this person's house is where this pathway is on the side lot. And I do believe it's a renter that lives there now, but I don't think that makes the concerns of somebody who lives in that house any less, solely because they're a renter. The property owners, the Cruzes, have expressed their concerns for quite a while about the condition of that walkway. Before it was tear off, it was almost unrecognizable as an asphalt pathway. The grass had pretty much taken over. You could tell that it was a walkway, but it wasn't what you would consider a pathway like the Metro Parks has now, narrow and very broken up. Times are different now. Maybe 60 years ago you could have a pathway going that close to a house without kids playing at night and throwing things up against your house or concerns at night. There probably could be or possibly more sidewalks on Birch Lane there. There are no sidewalks. To actually, when I looked at it, and don't think I didn't take this, I did not take this decision lightly to bring this before you, and I've walked it several times. There is a road 1.5 houses farther to the north. I think you called it Father Martel Parkway or whatever it is. It's 63 paces to walk a little farther north to access that parking lot. There possibly could, the church, if they were concerned with safety or neighbors, could put a walkway or a path there. I see a lot of complications with a walkway there. Talking to our maintenance supervisors and our superintendent of utilities, a pathway that far from anywhere of our maintenance buildings to keep that shoveled during the wintertime would be complications. This pathway, actually, you encroach on the neighbors' driveways. They're aprons. You actually have to walk on the neighbors' aprons to get to this pathway. Their aprons kind of come together. There's two driveways that meet at that point. There was, I go back as far as I can, I've seen a map very similar to that. I see no minutes of meetings that was ever dedicated. There was ordinances back then that talked about how to build sidewalks. This was an asphalt path, so it wouldn't be considered a sidewalk. So there's never been a variance to allow it to be built in that manner. It's not been dedicated as a public walkway or a path as you do when we do a project. The developers, when they build them, we bring those forward and have them dedicated as an improvement. There's no proof that was dedicated as an improvement. There possibly, with going back talking to people that I know were around, there were gentlemen handshakes, agreements with neighbors in the church to maintain that walkway. When the complaints started coming about the condition of that walkway and people's concerns about falling, and somebody even mentioned the kids falling and having accidents. Times are different. They might not have sued 20 years ago, but I don't think that's going to stop them now. City does have insurance, so, you know, I shouldn't hold that as a complete concern. But the maintenance stopped. No, nobody was maintaining it. It quit being shoveled. Nobody was mowing the property. Superintendent of Utilities went and talked to the neighbors and talked to the church. They talked to people in the office and talked to the maintenance people there, and they were done taking care of it. They said, we're not going to shovel it anymore. We're not going to mow that. You know, the neighbors mowed it from time to time. Again, it's a unique situation. There is some utilities in that area, so an easement would be kept. But I think that pathway has lived its use, and if council so chooses to do something different, I'll be challenged to do something different. I think this is the best decision for the city. Again, it's 63 paces to the Father Martel Parkway, where the people can walk around, and depending on where you're going, it may not even be that much farther out of the way to go to high school by using that pathway. It's directly east of the high school. Feel bad that some people have been using it, but I think it's not in the best interest of the city to keep and maintain that area and to divide it up between the, and the CIC would actually be the ultimate. I mean, we're asking to send this to the CIC to do negotiations with either property owners or somebody else that might have interest in that. People could get involved and talk to the CIC if they've got a better idea than just dividing it in half. I'll answer any particular questions, but again, I just think solely because those people that live there are renters, you know, we shouldn't look at their concerns of their safety at night, their privacy. Again, this isn't a sidewalk along the street in the public right-of-way. This is a path that passes within 10 feet of your bedroom window along the side of the house.
No. It's a garage.
It's the side of the house, garage, side of the house.
Both of them are
but
garages.
it's still your house. You have no privacy on the side or rear of your house. So if you have any other questions, I'll be glad to try to answer them to my best of my ability. And again, I didn't pass this through. I didn't ask for emergency. You know, that's the need for the 3 readings on an item like this.
Mr. Dembinski.
Thank you, Madam President. I would support sending this on to the 3rd reading just to allow more time for research. I did bring up the county auditor's website, and actually the mayor is correct. There is no way to get on that walk without accessing it through one of the 2 houses' driveways. To me, that doesn't seem like an optimal solution. If I was either of those houses, I would not want people walking in my driveway before walking onto something else. So I would like to see it in person. The auditor's website can only provide so much data, but I would personally be in favor of moving this along, but not necessarily killing it yet. I need more time to research.
Thank you. Is that complete?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Madam President. I'm looking at that, and it looks like the variance of the street, the apron or driveway would be considered like an apron, which is past your sidewalk. So if you actually had a sidewalk, which these streets back here don't, which is a shame to start with, but that's nothing we can do here and fix immediately. But what I will say is there's no sidewalks. Looking here, and I appreciate Councilman Nahorn's ability to let me look over his shoulder. The demarcation line runs through their driveway, yes, but that's a street variance from the city owned. So the property, the crosswalk actually does go all the way to the street in the piece of property that's variance from the, looks like street access, right? So unless I'm reading that wrong, Mr.
Now, are you asking to differentiate between the
driveway,
city
yes.
right-of-way and the city-owned path? I think that's
Yes.
the confusion. I think
Right.
we have a
It
city-owned.
doesn't go on the private.
Okay, let's ask the law director to address that. I think we're talking about the ownership of the right-of-way is still with the property owner, correct? The right-of-way on the street.
Well, I'd like to see the map first of all. I'm not sure what Mr. Miller's looking at. I mean, I don't
Okay,
know if
this
the
is
aprons
the-
are trespassing on the city property.
This is the one that came with the legislation.
Right. I'd like to see that.
That next one probably would be even better. I think that next one shows. This is probably the better one, Cora. This one shows probably the boundaries a little bit better. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, pass that down. I'm-
I don't know if that's her property. It's the city. I mean, just a cursory review of that, it looks like it's the city's right of way that they would have to go through. Quite frankly, I'm not from this, I'd have to look at this to see who owns that property, but from looking at it, it's the city's right of way, so it wouldn't necessarily be a trespass.
Right, that's the way I read that. I read that plat that you won't be trespassing on private property to use that walk from the street to St. Joe's property. And that to me is right there enough to be annoyed over the do not trespass onto a community walk. That right, I have a problem with that right off the bat. And then it looks like it's about 12, I mean, you had stated 12 feet and then 10 feet. I'd really like to know that distance because in the development behind, off of Dodge, off of 58, the new design has those houses closer. I believe, I think they're about 12 feet apart, some of them. And so if they're willing to have their bedroom on one side and the next bedroom on the other side 12 feet apart, I can't see a problem with temporary people walking a crosswalk 12 feet away from a garage and 12 feet away from a garage to go ahead and say that that's too close. We're doing this all the wrong way. We're taking away pedestrian-friendly opportunity. And that's the wrong direction, for me at least. Thank you for that, Mr. Neal.
Okay, can you please pass that drawing down to the law director? Mr. Law Director, you had a comment, and then Mr. Kaczynski.
Just, I just wanted to dispel any concerns about the city. It has nothing to do with any position, but to dispel any concerns about variances, the city doesn't have to give itself a variance. The city gives variances to property owners, not to itself.
Right.
So I'm not concerned about variances, but I think the mayor had other reasons for his.
I'll have you down after Mr. Dembinski, Mr. Janik. Mr. Miller, is that complete?
As long as I can get a final understanding as to at least confirming what I see on that plat, that the city owns property that goes from the street to the private property parking lot of St. Joe's, that it is a community walk, that if you're trespassing on somebody's drive, somebody probably put an apron drive over top of city property, is what I see. I see somebody putting a wider apron out and covering up the crosswalk part that leads to the street. So therefore, thank you very much. Now we'll just have to add to that to put a concrete walk back if we were to return this to a pedestrian-friendly walk between those two areas. No further questions, Madam President.
Please
Thank you.
pass that drawing back to Mrs. Sadinsky. All right, Mr. Dembinski and then Mr. Janik.
Thank you, Madam President. So I'm pro pedestrian also. We're talking about the stuff on North Main. Very excited about that. I'm in favor of keeping this, but I guess I'm not a property lawyer, so how does that work? When somebody has 10, 20 feet of their driveway on the city's property leading up to the road, is that not considered their property?
Well, they're within the city's right of way. And I don't know when those aprons were put on, but we all have aprons in the city's right of way, by virtue of being an apron to the street. City's right of way is the number of, I forget offhand, the number of feet from the
Center.
Right. So I don't know when those sidewalks were put in, but from the old surveying map there, it's clear that the pathway extended from the street through the other side.
And I agree, and even looking at, again, the county auditor's website, that still looks accurate to this day.
Right.
I guess, so, and maybe this is getting somewhat hyperbolic, but let's say somebody's walking on the south person's driveway, but within the city's right of way. what happens if something happens? Is that because it's outside of their, let's say somebody gets hit?
What are you referring to? I'm not sure what you're talking about. I mean, the
So you
city
just
owns
said we
property
have-
from the street to the other side into St. Joseph's parking lot.
So, no, okay. Let's say you said everybody has an apron on the city's right of
Well,
way.
you're talking about the apron, if this map is correct, their apron is on actually city property versus their own property within the city right of way. I think that's the distinction.
Correct, as is all of ours. So,
No, not necessarily, because remember, that's city property. That city property appears to go from the street from the street. That strip of property goes from the street all the way to St. Joseph's driveway, or, parking lot in
Right.
the back.
right,
Their aprons are actually within that city property.
correct.
That's different from you and I having an apron on our own property within the city's right of way. There's a difference. There is a difference there. So I'm correcting myself for your
Okay.
edification.
So if somebody was walking on that path and they were within the city's right of way, but on that guy's driveway, is the city liable? Because that's,
It's the city's, if they're truly on the city's property, they're trespassing, meaning the owners of those respective lots. If they put their aprons onto the city property, different from the city right of way, onto the city property, which is a strip of that strip, that 10-foot by 116 strip, they may be trespassing.
which I don't believe it is from the way this looks at least.
I don't know. We'd have to have it surveyed. We'd have to have it looked at. I mean, we'd have to actually do some surveying to determine who exactly is on what property.
Okay. Okay.
So is your question about liability?
To an extent, yes. I mean, so if I'm that homeowner, I think of my driveway as my driveway. And if somebody is in my driveway and for some reason I hit them, I believe I would be at fault. But if a large portion of their driveway is on city property and I hit them, I mean, I should still be at fault. But is
You're
that,
still fault.
Still fun.
but is that this, I mean, is there any fallback for the city because,
I don't see how a person being hit by a car on city property is necessarily the city's fault.
okay,
I don't see how that would be unless we did something to create a traffic hazard.
okay. Maybe I'm just overthinking this. But I still think I need to research this more and get a better understanding before moving on. So I think I'll yield for now, but thank you.
Okay. Mr. Janik, then Mr. Calgary, then Mr. Winarski.
Yeah, I just had a question about to the residents of the area. It's been a while since I walked that path. In fact, I learned how to ride a bike on that path. Yeah. There used to be a floodlight on a phone pole that shined down on it. Is that still there?
Yes.
Okay. That's why I just wanted to make sure for safety reasons. That
Yes.
was, okay. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Calgary.
Yes, seems to be a lot of information that we didn't have at the beginning. And looking at the maps, where it shows the right-of-way line that is confusing, where on the other side of that line, there are driveway aprons. You need to go to the center spot, or the center portion of that rounded area. That is where the property lines extend straight to that center spot. So they would, like a cul-de-sac, they would come to a pie point in the center of that lot. So therefore, those driveways, in my opinion, are on city property. The one driveway is. And, I would like to make a motion to send this back to committee so that we can discuss this further. I don't think that council floor is where we should debate it. I think that is debating in committee. That's what committee's for. I would like to make a motion to send this item back to committee.
Okay, there's a motion to send A1821 back to committee. Mr. Nahorn.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to send A18-21 back to committee. Mr. Miller, wait a minute, before I do that, Mr. Calvert, is that complete?
Yes.
As far as, then Mr.
Yes.
Winarski and then Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Madam President. Let me see if I got this right. We have oral history, and then we have some documentation. But what I do know is this is city property, correct? What's the city's obligation? We should be mowing that, shouldn't we? If it's grass, and we are. If it were to go back to asphalt, well, could we put asphalt down as a walk? Or are we, I know in 46, we went to concrete being required for sidewalks.
I think the city of Amherst can do whatever the city of Amherst wants to do.
Okay. Would that include limiting, I mean, could we make it just a summer walk? Because I imagine most of the traffic is during the summer. And then, I guess, close it or not shovel it? I mean, do we have an obligation to maintain it in the winter?
We have an obligation to maintain our premises if we know people are walking.
So we'd have to shovel or plow or whatever in the winter also.
We should.
Keep the walk open. It says walk on that plot. Is that a legal term?
There are walks. The problem with this situation is that back in the day, whoever created this didn't follow through with dedicating it or recording it as a walk or a drive, etc.
Yeah, I didn't see any language on there that suggests what that
Never
parcel is. Or, all right, I agree. There's a lot to be learned here, and some additional information. So yeah, the tabling I think is very appropriate. Thank you. That's all.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Winarski. Mr. Miller, you wish to comment?
Thank you, Madam President. Just briefly, thank you for coming out. And I think the lesson learned here is, please, if something like this comes up, and you may not know it, I guess, maybe you didn't know it. See, this is kind of one of the reasons why we push for 3 readings, because as soon as the first reading happens, people hear about it. Committee, the debate in committee, this is why we need these televised, and they need to be out in front of people and in people's hands so they can see what's going on in their local government, so we can get civically involved when there's an issue. So you coming here, as uncomfortable as it may be, educates us. And we can't serve you without you letting us know when there's a problem. The initial understanding that I received on my first vote, I'm not happy, because I feel like the information that I had was just a piece of it, and I'm not sure how it got that way, but we were given just enough information to make us think one way, and that is an unfair way of doing business. It's an unethical way of doing business, and I don't think that anybody up here wants to do it that way. So I thank you for coming up here. I'm all about making sure we have as much pedestrian-friendly walkways as we can, and moving backwards, especially in light of the fact that we're pushing our residents for walks. For us to remove asphalt or remove it as a walk really disturbs me as well. So thank you to our councilmen who moved this, Mr. Cowger and Mr. Nahorn for seconding, and getting this back to committee, where I agree with both of them, and Mr. Cowger, I hand it to you for saying, let's get this back to where the debate, and we can get some information, and then we can bring it back forward and have our 3 readings. So I commend you for that, making that motion and moving this back. And I'd like to get a lot more information on this. I'd like to see what we can do. Maybe there's some grants out there that will get this put back in even better than it was. But we need this opportunity, and selling it off quickly is not the way to handle this. So thank you for coming up here. This completely changed my vote. And that's what people out there need to know. Like, as soon as we get educated on something, we're going to do the right thing if we have the right information. I think I have the right information, but I'm still going to look for more, just to make sure. And Mr. Dembinski brought up a good point about the drives and how that impacts the city-owned a lot, and so we'll get to the bottom of this. And thank you, Mr. Mayor, for giving us some information and giving us a chance. And I'll be probably in touch trying to figure out what's our best way to go with this. And thank you for coming up here. I yield the floor back to the speaker. Thank you.
Mr. Winarski.
Thank you, Madam President. You had the superintendent of utilities interview the owners of the land that abut it. You had the superintendent of utilities talk to the church. This was presented to us with all the information you had. You even said that what we just witnessed, this document here, does not actually support the original intent. My whole point here is I have to strongly object to the word unethical. It's inappropriately used at this in this city. I do think you did as well as you could with the information we had. I don't think you were trying to jam this down our throat. I happen to agree with Mrs. Reichert and the Uhas. I like the idea of a walk there. Ran the baseball program for a while. There's a huge need for what this provides. I don't debate that one bit, but I do object to the word unethical. I don't think it's appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Mayor.
And just one more quick comment, and unethical definitely isn't quite the wording I would hope to use. I've had some plans too in the future once this gets separated. This really is an unnecessary parcel of land. It's a lot of maintenance, a lot of care, a lot of trouble for the city. There are other ways of getting a walkway there. A more appropriate place might be along the walkway there going into the church. Maybe the city can take the amount of dollars that it might have spent to create that walkway there and put it along the walkway there going into the parking lot. There's other options. This parcel of land, it really isn't a good thing for the city to maintain and keep hold of. But if we're able to work with the church, which I'm hoping to do, maybe 100 and, like I said, 125, 30 feet, whatever that is, to that parking lot, maybe we can get a walkway or a real sidewalk with some city dollars there if council would approve. That's kind of a unique situation that would take council support, so maybe that would be a better solution than just either building a walkway there or completely kiboshing it altogether. So this could come to a pretty good compromise, I would hope.
Yep.
So I'm somewhat glad myself that it's back to committee. And of course, it's going to be a little farther for a few people to walk, but honestly, people coming from the other direction, it's going to be a little shorter for some people. But I think there's a better place for this walkway than between those two houses.
Okay.
So I'll probably have a plan for you the next time this comes up for committee to have a better place for that.
Mrs. Riker, would you please go to the microphone?
As it is the grass now, I think the city mowed once. Is that correct? Anybody, do you know? Mowed once or twice?
It was done late in the summer, and by the time the grass grew, the dry season, we did start the neighbor, I think somebody did mow it once, and by the time it caught up with us,
Yes.
we started mowing it. And believe me, the street garage has direction directly from the mayor that's going to get mowed till this gets settled.
Because I know Felicia, who's the renter, has mowed it several times also.
And for the past 60 years, somebody else, I mean, the city has never mowed it until this last year.
Yeah, I'm sure. Mr. Janik, where are you?
It was asphalt.
Have you mowed that when you were living there?
No. I was 4 years old when we moved.
Okay. And when there was too much snow, if someone didn't shovel it, we just didn't walk through there. We went around. Or you trod through it. And pretty soon the snow melted and people then just continued on. I mean, you do what you have to do. But a walkway there has been a godsend. It really has. To lots and lots of people in Amherst. So, and it's not just that street. It's not just Terra Lane. It's not just Birch Lane. They come from down Woodhill, other streets beyond, and they walk through there. I guess you have to live there to see it. But, okay.
Okay, thank you very much, Mrs. Riker. There's a motion and a second to return this to committee. Any further comments or questions? Seeing none, roll call vote.
Mr. Dembinski?
Yes.
Mr. Cowger?
Yes.
Mr. Benarski?
Yes.
Mr. Nahorn?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Mr. Van Turen?
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. It will return to committee, and I believe that's the Building and Lands Committee, Mr. Winarski, is it not?
Yes, it is.
And will you be calling that? You may consider calling it tonight when we go through that, at the end when we call for the committees,
Okay.
if you wish. Okay. Thank you very much, and thank you for coming. If you want to stay until the end, you'll find out if we assign it to a committee date.
I only ask that at some point I get the original document that map back.
Yes,
After.
I will copy it, and I will make sure it gets back to you.
Thanks,
I'll
Ms.
drop it off myself, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, if you want to stay for a couple of minutes, it's not going to take too much longer, and you can find out about the committee assignment. if you wish. I mean, it's up to you. Okay, the next item is item 8. Well, no, item 7, no, 8. Ordinances and resolutions, third reading, there are none. Number 9 is miscellaneous and acknowledgement of the public. Is there anyone here wishing to speak on any topic? Mr. Winarski.
If I may, and thank you, Madam President. This Wednesday is Administrative Professionals Day. And while I didn't get you a gift, Ms. Levinsky, I do want to take this moment and say thank you for keeping us on path, for smacking me upside the head when I need a good smack upside the head. I genuinely appreciate working with you, and I feel very grateful and fortunate to work with you. So I just want to say thank you.
Thank you very much.
That's all.
Mr. Dembinski.
Thank you, Madam President. Yesterday was Earth Day, and one of the things I've been working on and researching deals with algae blooms in Lake Erie. And there's not a lot of agriculture inside of Amherst, but we do have a lot of homeowners that put on fertilizer and whatnot, and that can impact that also. So we're actually putting on a free seminar for anybody in Amherst to learn how the proper way to apply fertilizer, pesticides, and herbicide to their lawns. So that will be Thursday, May 10th at 6:30 p.m. and it's going to be at the Amherst Historical Society. We're putting that on in conjunction with the Ohio State University Lorain County Extension office.
Okay, thank you very much.
That is all, thank you.
Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Madam President. Just to clarify, there was no intended implication that anything unethical was happening in this situation. What I was saying is if people are withholding information or not giving it all up, then yes, that is, in my opinion, unethical. And I am not appreciative of that. But let me once again say if. In this case, I don't know. And I'm not implying it. So, Mr. Mayor, there was no implication there. I'm just talking about in our society, when we try to have civil discourse like this that's supposed to take place up here, that we do not do it that way. That we provide all the information. We sift through it all so we can draw conclusions accurately. And I think that in our day and age right now, we don't see that as much. People will provide only enough information to get their agenda through. I'm not stating that that is the case by the homeowner. I'm not stating that's the case. And I didn't even know that the superintendent had went down there and met with them. There's a lot of information it seems that we don't know up here. I'd like to see maps. I'd like to see more information in front of me. And I guess that's on me now to have to go through the steps of asking questions that I think should already, or should not need to have to be asked. Like, is there any more information? Where's the maps on this? What are you using as a guide? So I will make a commitment that I will ask for more information and do more due diligence instead of, like you said, just going with what's given to us. So at no time was that implied. I want to make sure we're clear on that. So, because that's what it seemed like you were interpreting that, and I'm going to clear that up right now. So thank you.
Any further comments or questions? Mr. Van Truren.
I don't usually bring up any fundraisers here at City Council, and this will probably be the only time I do it, but this coming Sunday, there's a fundraiser for an individual named Todd Engel. He's a beloved Amherst teacher, coach, and friend who's battling leukemia. Many of us know him. I've known him for 15 years, I think. He's a wonderful person, and I think he would very much appreciate it if we all showed him our support by spreading the word and joining, if we can, for this fundraiser. It's going to be this coming Sunday, April 29th from 1 to 4 p.m. at St. Francis Cabrini Hall in Lorain. If you're not able to make it, anyone can ask me. I can let you know how you can donate. But again, wonderful individual who's given back a lot to Amherst. Who's a wonderful person who's deserving of our support. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Van Truen. Anyone else? Thank you very much. We'll go to item 10, agenda requests and committee meeting schedules.
Madam President, this one item was added after the last council meeting, so I'd like to read it, and it was A1823. It was in finance, enter into a depository agreement with First National Bank, and was already considered this evening, and then A1821 was sent back to committee, building and lands. Those are the only items. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Finance, Mr. Cowger.
No items at this time, please cancel.
Thank you very much. Building and lands, Mr. Winarski.
In advance of my saying anything, I'd like to ask the administration with regards to this walkway. Definitely, we're going to bring this in front of committee. I'm looking at the 7th or the 21st. Is there a sense of urgency to move this through?
If we're gonna build a sidewalk, it'd be nice to get it included with the sidewalk program that we're doing, so I think I can have a plan, an alternate by that time.
Okay, by the 7th or the 21st?
7th.
What is your, okay. Mrs. Reichert, 7th, May 7th,
At
Monday?
7 p.m., right?
7.
You're gonna call it 7.
Yeah, let's revisit this May 7th, please, at 7 p.m. Okay. I'm going to swing by sometime here in the next couple of days, if you don't mind.
Is that complete?
That is.
Okay, thank you very much. Streets, Mr. Van Truen.
Nothing at this time, please cancel.
Community Development, Mr. Miller.
No items, please cancel.
Executive, Mr. Miller.
No items, please cancel.
Ordinance, Mr. Dembinski.
No items at this time, Madam President.
Utilities, Mr. Janik.
No items, Madam Chair, please cancel.
Recycle, Mr. Nahorn.
Please keep recycling.
Technology, Mr. Dembinski.
No items, please cancel.
Police and Fire, Mr. Winarski.
Nothing at this time, Madam President.
Annexation, Mr. Van Truen.
No items, please cancel.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll go to item number 11, reports of the administration. Mr. Mayor.
I have no report tonight. Oh,
No
okay,
re-
maybe the rest of them do.
No report, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Jeffries,
No report, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Mr. Ramsey,
Only that we are processing the returns right now, end of report.
Okay, thank you
and
very
I
much.
still have no report.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Cowger.
Make a motion to accept the reports of the administration.
Thank you very much. Mr. Dembinski.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to accept the reports of the administration. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Motion is carried 7-0. Mr. Dembinski.
Move to adjourn.
Mr. Cowger.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. We are adjourned at 8:04. Thank you very much.